Hey everyone, happy Casual Friday. I hope you're ready for the weekend. I know that I am too. So today we're going to be going over human ingenuity. So would anyone like to tell me what ingenuity could possibly mean? Yes. Ingenuity means how people invent things and the way they think. That's not a bad answer. So ingenuity essentially means how humans create and innovate. And so we're going to talk about scientific innovation today and human ingenuity. And I want us to be able to approach it from the context of scientific innovation. And so we're going to be discussing innovation in society. So let's move on. So one of the things I really want to focus on is innovation from the past and present, and be able to evaluate the perspectives on society then and now. And then we're going to be talking about the TOK prompt. What is the meaning of meaning? And I know that might seem confusing to some of you, but once we get into the actual reading, we're going to provide a little bit more context on how do we define this. And then we're going to do a scientific focus on human ingenuity and innovation through CRISPR. Can anybody tell me what CRISPR is? Yes. CRISPR is where the scientists take DNA and rearrange it. And that's absolutely correct. Good. To be a little bit more in depth, CRISPR is the process by which scientists or medical doctors or specialists can go in and essentially alter the human genome. Now we're going to discuss that a little bit more in depth as we get into the reading. All right. So the past and the present and perspectives on scientific innovation. Before we begin, I want us to take a couple minutes to have a little thinking exercise and envision what life was like 100 years ago in the year 1924. Right? This was just after the post-World War I era. It was during the 1920s within the United States, and there was a lot of innovation going on at that time, right? But I want us to think back up and put ourselves in the shoes of an individual from 100 years ago, and think about the technology that was present at that time. And think to ourselves, if I was an individual from 100 years ago, how might I predict what the future is going to look like? Right? Because if we're an individual from 100 years ago, let's think of something. Let's think of something that if you're an individual from 100 years ago, what kind of technologies existed? Yes. Airplanes, air travel, absolutely. Right? So let's think of in terms of air travel. What else? What else existed at the time that was considered slightly innovative? Yes. The telephone. Absolutely. So the telephone was another form of mass communication. Right? It allowed us to communicate from one to the other, or one individual to the next. What was another? Radio. Absolutely. So think of the context of these scientific innovations that existed 100 years ago, and how might an individual foresee some of the scientific innovations that would have occurred 100 years from now. All right? And then I want you to also think of yourself as an individual. Where are we going within the next 100 years in terms of science? So once again, let's think about these questions. So here's the hook. How do you think people in the past envision the future? All right, I want you to take a minute to think about that. And what are some specific innovations that people from the past envisioned with the future, and how accurate were these predictions? And then I want you to compare and contrast the accuracies and inaccuracies of the predictions in terms of human innovation. I'd like to do a little collaborative exercise, and I want us to get into groups and be able to discuss and then answer these three questions. All right, so get into groups and take about 5 to 7 minutes to explain, and then we'll come back. All right, so now that we've had time for this, what were some of the specific innovations that people from the past envisioned for the future? What did this group come up with? So we said that there would be flying cars. And I believe that a lot of people from 1924 believed that cars would be flying in the year 2024. I think that's a pretty good explanation, right? Now my question is, do we have flying cars? Yes, but are they in mass use? No, they're not. Not yet. Maybe one day. So what were some other aspects? What were some other things that they may have envisioned about the future? Yes. Maybe we were living on the moon. Okay. So my question is, are we currently living on the moon now? No, but what are some things that scientists are now discussing? Yes. The possibility of living on Mars and colonizing Mars. Absolutely. So that is something that we are heading towards in the future, but they made those predictions, but we're not quite there yet. Right? So there were some correct predictions, and there were some inaccuracies. Now, I want you to take into consideration that these people from 100 years ago, their perspectives were limited to the technology that was available to them. Right? So this may be a little bit more a TOK principle that we might go into a little bit more in depth down the line, but in the world of science and in the world of human speculation, there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And so there are things that we don't know that we don't know. And so here I believe that the unknown unknown principle applies, because these people from 100 years ago were making these projections about scientific innovation into the future based on the scientific and historical context of the technology that was available to them at the time. Right? So I want us to take a look at the cartoon here, this retro futuristic cartoon. And what were some of the connections that people from the past made about what could happen in the future? Yes. So they made these specific predictions based on the technology that was available to them, and they thought about these things that are considered luxury now being normal in the future. Absolutely. So here, what do we see? So we see two people, they're looking at through a screen with headphones on, and they're communicating with people they care about. Good. Good. Do we see any connections with that now? Yes. Smartphones. Absolutely. But it's not just limited to smartphones, right? We have, in terms of communication, we have laptops, we have Skype, we have Zoom, we have all of these platforms that allow us to directly communicate, right? Do we need headphones? Yes, no, it depends on the privacy you want to keep in terms of who you communicate with, and making sure that other people, you're not being rude to other people, right? But that right there is a pretty accurate prediction on the scientific innovations that were occurring or that have already occurred, right? Now, let's look at the airplane here. Is this a pretty accurate description or prediction? Yes. Okay, why? Well, because there are planes that have, more luxury-based classes that allow for people to have more things, especially in first class. Absolutely, but don't you think that this might be a slight exaggeration? Yes. Good. And so once again, were their predictions based on the current technology and innovations that were available to them? Absolutely. Right? So put yourself in your own present mind, and what kind of scientific innovations are we not even discovering yet that could be possible into the future? All right. So now, I want us to read the BBC article, How Science Transformed the Last 100 Years. All right, and there's two vocabulary words or concepts I want to introduce, macro and micro. All right, so macro means big, and this is going to be related to space travel. All right, and how did scientists create scientific innovations that enhance our understanding of the universe and our place within it? And that's what we're going to start bringing in the TOK. What is the meaning and purpose of the human condition? Right, and how, by using this space travel, or just making the scientific innovation in space travel, help us understand our purpose in the universe and human nature on a macro level, or the macro scale. And so for the micro aspect, and we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive as we do the CRISPR article, but how have we as a species gained a greater insight into ourselves based on our knowledge of the human body and DNA and the human genome? All right, so I would like for us to stay in our groups. I want you to be able to read the article and be able to identify the different concepts on a macro and micro scale in terms of the predictions that came true and the innovations that happened within the last 100 years, and what are some things that have been discovered, and what are some scientific innovations that we didn't even understand or were even aware of back 100 years ago. Okay, so now that we've finished reading, I want us to be able to discuss. Now, let's briefly discuss the macro aspects of scientific innovation, and then I want us to go into micro. Okay? So, how did scientists create scientific innovations that enhance our understanding of the universe? What was one of the big things that we discovered in terms, recently? There are two things I want to discuss in terms of understanding, our greater understanding of the universe. Yes. The Hubble Space Telescope and how it allowed us to be able to look at the different galaxies and the different parts of the universe that aren't going to be possible for us to travel to. Absolutely. Right? So remember that, remember when we first got that image of these tiny little stars from the Hubble Space Telescope that turned out to be galaxies. 8 billion years ago, right? Now, how does that broaden our understanding of our place in the universe? So, what is our place in the universe? When we think about this, right, on a macro level, we feel pretty small. In terms of us just being a pale blue dot, to quote Carl Sagan, within this greater expanse of the cosmos. Right? And how does scientific innovation and human ingenuity grant us that greater insight? That's something to think about. Now let's go to the micro level. How have we, as a species, gained a greater insight into ourselves on a micro level through human ingenuity and scientific innovation? Yes. So the article is explaining that there was no knowledge of DNA or any understanding of the micro universe and how things operated on an atomic level. Good, but what was the big thing that's going to be leading into our discussion of CRISPR? Yes. So the human genome and the ability to rearrange DNA and insert specific desirable traits and being able to cure particular diseases and illnesses. That's it right there. The micro understanding has helped us understand how the human body works, right? And there have been so many positive implications on this, but there are also some ethical implications that we need to discuss as well in terms of that innovation, right? CRISPR, in layman's terms, it's altering DNA. So I want you to take that into consideration as we move on with this article, because it's going to be incredibly important. Because I believe this article on CRISPR really aligns with the TOK. What is the meaning of meaning, and how does it establish this context on who we are as human beings and the very nature and identity of who we are as a species and where we are going with it? All right, so CRISPR meaning and what it is and how it affects us. So now I want us to be able to, now that we've discussed the micro aspect of scientific innovation and human ingenuity, I want us to read the CRISPR article. And I want us to be able to answer the questions by the end. how has the creation and use of CRISPR possibly redefined our meaning in terms of human purpose, identity, and human nature as a whole? And then what are the benefits and drawbacks of this innovative technology, and what are the implications behind it? So take some time to read, and I want you to be able to answer the questions by the end of the reading. So let's take about 20 minutes, and then we'll come back after break at the top of the hour, and then we'll discuss. So now that we've read this, first of all, I want to discuss the positives. What is the main positive behind the understanding of human DNA, the human genome, and CRISPR? What did y'all come up with? So we said that CRISPR overall has a lot of positive benefits in terms of how we approach diseases, illnesses, and autoimmune disorders, and we can be able to identify them and correct them before it substantially harms the individual. Absolutely. I think that's an incredible thing, right? To be able to take this technology and be able to apply it for the greater good, right? And overall improve us as a species. Imagine a world with no autoimmune disorders, no disease, right? And no hereditary defects. We can fix those, right? What's some of the drawbacks? Yes. So it was discussing in the article that it's becoming more prevalent, and people are starting to use it in order to modify their potential offspring in order to have more desirable traits. And the ethical implications behind that could be the lack of regulation or being able to have a separate form of people that might create problems in the future. Absolutely. There are some ethical implications behind that, right? On one hand, you have the positives of being able to treat these diseases that we have never been able to treat before, right? Just going back to the micro aspect of scientific innovation. 100 years ago, we had no knowledge of DNA, right? Or the human genome. And now we have this incredible knowledge, and we're able to apply it, and we're able to help people, right? Therefore, redefining possibly our purpose. Right? So we've talked about the benefits and drawbacks and the ethical implications. But this is the big one, the big TOK one. How has the creation and use of CRISPR possibly redefined our meaning in terms of human purpose, identity, and human nature as a whole? Let's take some time to answer, because I believe this is going to be a pretty difficult question, right? And it encapsulates everything that we've talked about throughout the lesson, and it requires a substantial and comprehensive application of knowledge based on the readings that we have done. So, let's take some time, and then we'll come back in about 3 minutes and see what the groups can come up with. All right, so final leg of the lesson, everyone. I'm excited to hear your answers. How do we answer question 1? How has the creation and use of CRISPR possibly redefined our meaning in terms of purpose, identity, and human nature as a whole? Yes. So I believe that the creation and use of CRISPR and the fact that it's being used more and more, it's starting to change how we see ourselves as a species and what it truly means to be human. I think that's a great answer. So, what it truly means to be human. How do we establish identity? What it truly means to be human.